Probably the most common question that I get asked when people reach out to us is the question of where should I set up this offshore company? And today I'm going to talk a little bit about that question and specifically discuss how where you form the company almost doesn't matter and what does matter instead. So let's dive in and talk about it. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Welcome everyone. I am Michael. If you are new here, thank you for coming and joining us. I appreciate your support. And if you're interested in help, we are helping you with relocating to other countries, so getting residency permits, that sort of thing, as well as second citizenships, Plan Bs, all that sort of thing, as well as international corporate structuring, so setting up offshore companies, particularly figuring out how to navigate the international tax nuances, which are fairly complex. I always tell people if it was easy as setting up a company in BVI and paying no tax, everybody would do it. The department would be out of business. That is not true. You cannot do that. And so as a result, we help you kind of look at the country that you're in, the country you're going to, where your operations are, where your staff is, where your customers are, how you're receiving payments, all that sort of thing, and figuring out based on that, what is the best solution for you, and then helping you to implement it. So if that's helpful, please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or send a message through offshorecitizen.net. All right, with that in mind. So where you form the company almost doesn't matter. It does matter a bit. And the areas that it matters in particularly are, of course, it matters that you can have reasonable banking. It matters sometimes in the case of payment processing, if that's relevant to you. There may be some differences in terms of the ongoing cost. These frankly are like pretty minimal. I mean, the most expensive places are not that expensive and the cheapest places are not that cheap. So, you're talking about usually it's going to cost you a few $1,000s a year to maintain a company. Maybe in some place it's like, okay, it's a few hundred, and another place it's 5,000, but it's not that big in the overall scheme of things. What is important, what is most important before any of that is understanding the rules that will apply to your company. And so that's what I want to spend the majority of the time in this video talking about. So first of all, number one, it really matters where you as the owner of the company are resident, okay? Very important, because that country's rules will apply to the extent that they have CFC rules, probably depending on how the company is being operated, but probably management control rules, possibly local source income rules, so permanent establishment rules, things like this, as well as a bunch of others. And so these are a bit of pieces of jargon. I've done videos in the past trying to explain those terms. Don't worry too much about it for the sake of this video, but they're really important concepts to understand for properly legally planning to avoid tax. And as you can have AI and things like this, it's probably going to get harder and harder if you're not doing it properly, because it will become easier and easier for them to kind of work through. So you want to make sure you've done it properly, you can sleep well at night, everything is good. Okay, so that's the first thing, is the rules pertaining to international companies, what we might call it anti-avoidance rules, in the country that you're a resident, okay? You probably also want to understand the rules where your operations are based, to the extent that that is, and perhaps where your customers are based, depending on where that is, and maybe based on where your suppliers are based. So these would be all kind of things that we would look at, right? Sometimes those won't be too relevant. So suppliers in particular, like if you're buying products from China, it doesn't usually matter that much. Okay. It may matter based on the industry that you're in. That might be a factor, right? But generally speaking, that's kind of less of the deal. Where your customers are based, you're not typically taxed on where your customers are based, but it could be relevant, and it could be relevant how they're paying you and the types of income that you have. So for example, if you're selling electronic services, so let's call it like ebooks or courses or something like that, and you're selling it into the EU to EU company or customers, then you are probably going to be subject to VAT. So you have to kind of think about that. If you are, on the other hand, I don't know, selling some sort of foreign accounting services or something like that, then it typically will be based on where your operations are. So there's lots of these things that we have to sort of dig into. The point is, we want to start by understanding the rules. We want to understand who can tax you on what income, because then what we do is then we have to work around, okay, how does that fit into our strategy? And here's the point. Whether you're going to be taxable is not usually based on where the company is. Now, there are some exceptions to this. For example, if you're in Portugal, Portugal has a blacklist. Okay, so you have to be careful not to get stuck in the Portuguese blacklist. Very important, right? Blacklist, by the way, covers almost every country that you can think of that you would want to form a company. So there's some nuances there to going through it. It's actually even worse if you look at Brazil. Brazil has if you basically want a list of hey, Michael, give me a list of all the tax havens, just go and look up the Brazilian blacklist. Pretty much going to give you most of them. There's another list, which is really utterly bizarre. I'll do a video on that in the future that lists just crazy places and doesn't list any of the common ones. So blacklists are sometimes fun to go through. But the bottom line is blacklists important to consider, okay? After that, what might also be important is you frequently want a structure that is going to be able to take advantage of something called a participation exemption, okay? So what is a participation exemption? Again, I've done some videos on that, but briefly, it is that a parent company can receive dividends from a subsidiary company and not pay tax on that. And so often, depending on where you are, not always, but often, the best structure in order to be most tax efficient is to receive this money from the foreign company, not directly, but via that parent company, okay? And there are certain cases, like it's very common in the EU, that they'll say, okay, if the company is in another EU country, then it's not going to be taxed. Or if it's in a country that has such and such criteria, it's not going to be taxed. But in this other case, it is going to be taxed, right? So understanding that line of the rules is important, okay? The really, really important things that come up most frequently are, number one, the corporate residency rules of that company and making sure that the substance of the company matches those corporate residency rules. So I'll just give you like a very simple example. Let's say you're living in Canada and you're setting up a foreign company. This would apply if you were living in New Zealand, or if you were living in UK, or if you were living in Ireland, any of these places, the same principle is going to apply. You set up a foreign company and you're like, hey, listen, I don't want that company to pay tax. So where should I set it up? The answer is, there's about 20 places you can set up a company that will not result in tax. So that list of 20 places, you're like, well, how do I decide between them? And the answer is, in any single one of them, if you are not following the corporate residency rules to make sure it's foreign corporate resident, it will still be taxed in the local country. So the more important thing is not, well, which of those countries should I choose, Michael? It could be any of those countries. Like, it doesn't really matter that much. There might be like little nuances between them, but that's not the really important thing. The really important thing is, let's make sure that your local country is not going to consider that company tax. That's the really important part. And so usually that's something based on some kind of management control rules. There are variations on these. These are not the same country to country. So for example, in Denmark, they have something they call place of like day-to-day management, where the day-to-day management decisions made. It's quite different than UK, where it's the highest level management decisions. Okay, so same sort of concept, different interpretation, and one will lead to different results than the other. So important to notice the difference. Then we're going to say, okay, great. Based on we can navigate those rules. We figured out, all right, we have some sort of narrowing down. At least this company is going to be foreign. What's the other set of rules that matters? The other set of rules is typically these controlled foreign companies rules. Very, very important to understand them. Now, in some cases, there are exemptions from those rules in certain parts of the world. So for example, if you were in Portugal, their CFC rules, the way they're written, are that if you have an EU country where there is genuine activity in that, then the rules don't apply. Okay, so there are exemptions like this, but you need to understand what those exemptions are, and do you fit under those exemptions? Sometimes it's really easy. UK has a £500,000 per year active business income minimum. If you're under that minimum, you don't have to worry about those rules. Okay, great. Like, that's really simple to navigate, provided you fall into that threshold. If you're over that threshold, we got to work on other things. In some other countries, it's just all the time they're going to hit you. And so then we have to say, well, is there a way to work around those? And you may need some sort of other multi-layered structure in order to get there. So very, very important. Understand the rules of where you live, where the company is registered, where your employees or team are based, could include contractors, suppliers, customers, any of those could trigger something. Based on those rules, then we can have a conversation with forming a company. And there's probably a few different places. Yes, there are some places that tend to be preferential, usually because of banking and payment processing, not usually because of some other things, but it depends on the industry. It depends on how you receive payments, it depends on the currencies you're dealing with, it depends on all these different things. So I hope that helps. I know that doesn't give you a specific place. The whole point is there isn't a specific place. All right, that people obsessing over the specific place are obsessing over the wrong thing. So understand those rules. If you would like to understand those rules, I try to make videos about the specific countries, and I will make a bunch more coming up here because some of them need to be updated, etc. But also feel free to reach out to us. Again, send us an email, send us a message through offshorecitizen.net. We've got a form there that you can fill out, or book a call with me, calendar.com/Michael-Rosmer. Link in the description below, and I will see you guys on the next video.